What's good, guys? Welcome back to the first take. I'm Eddie Reese, and even though I'm not wearing a Game of Thrones t-shirt today, it's definitely still Game of Thrones time. It's always Game of Thrones time. And it's Histories and Lore time. This one's part 9, I believe. Season 5. Oh, I'm loving these. Last one may have been my favorite, to be honest. May have been. It got deep into the Dawn storyline and the history of the Martells, and it really kind of put into context things which we hadn't really been told in the show, or things which were mentioned but weren't really emphasized enough to really give us the context of where it all fits and people's motivations. And it just kind of made everything, as far as the Dawn storyline, make way more sense, way more. And the Martells instantly became way more awesome as well, thanks to that last one. So let's see what they're gonna reveal to us in this one. Let's jump in. Can't wait. Looking forward to this. Dance of the Dragons.
The Dance of Dragons, a true telling by Grandmaster Munkin, being a history of the war of Targaryen succession between the Princess Rhaenyra and Aegon, second of his name, that nearly destroyed the realm.
Curious about this one.
The Dance of the Dragons. A stupid name for a Targaryen civil war where my ancestors danced away my birthright. Before the war, House Targaryen counted 18 dragons. By the end, we had 2, and nearly as few Targaryens.
Fuck.
Who would never be as powerful or as feared again. The dance began, as many dances do, with an old man and a young girl. The queen had failed to produce a son for her king, so he anointed his daughter, the Princess Rhaenyra, as his heir. But years later, the king remarried, and his new wife, Queen Alicent of House Hightower, gave him a son. Feeble and foolish, the old king refused to change the succession. He didn't even see how his court had split into 2 rival camps of blacks and greens, after the dresses of the princess and the queen had worn to some tourney. One night, a servant found the old king had died in his sleep, and ran to inform Queen Alicent. Protocol dictated that the bells would be rung and a raven sent to Dragonstone to summon the heir, Princess Rhaenyra, for her coronation. But Alicent had other plans. Once she saw her dead husband's body, she sealed the room and had the servant thrown into the black cells to ensure his silence. At the hour of the owl, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Criston Cole, summoned the small council to inform them of the king's death. Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King and father to Queen Alicent, demanded that the succession be settled immediately. The decrepit old men of the small council were confused. The succession was settled in their minds. The old king had forced the lords of Westeros to swear fealty to Princess Rhaenyra as his heir. But Sir Criston Cole rightly pointed out that a son comes before a daughter. The council argued until dawn, when the Master of Coin finally stood up and declared he would have no part of treason. Sir Criston Cole, wisely, opened his throat with a dagger, ending the debate.
Should have seen that.
None were more surprised to hear of Prince Aegon's succession than Prince Aegon himself. At first, the fool rejected the crown, but his mother pointed out that his sister Rhaenyra would return such loyalty by taking his head. As the old king's true-born son, he'd always be a threat. Aegon relented. He was crowned in the Dragon Pit, and his wife and sister Helena became queen. His brother Aemond flew off to win over the few great lords whose support Aegon didn't already have. The banner of the Gold Dragon flew over King's Landing and the Red Keep as Aegon, second of his name, ascended the Iron Throne. He would not sit it long. When ravens carried the news of Aegon's coronation to Dragonstone, Princess Rhaenyra summoned her own Black Council. With her was her uncle and husband, Daemon Targaryen, considered by many to be the most dangerous man in Westeros. Few lords supported her, but the greatest of these was Corlys Velaryon, who controlled the largest fleet in the realm, and his Targaryen wife, Rhaenys, the old king's sister. Then there were her 5 sons, although none grown to manhood. A pitiful assembly, really. Combined, they couldn't match the power of House Hightower alone. But Rhaenyra had dragons. She, Daemon, and Rhaenys rode huge and formidable beasts, and 3 of her 5 sons were riders as well. Dragonstone also housed 6 more dragons without riders. Against this, King Aegon had only 4 dragons of his own. Dragons can burn a city, but only armies can take and hold it. If she was to prevail, Rhaenyra desperately needed the support of the few great houses not already sworn to Aegon. Her eldest son, Jacaerys, flew to the Vale in the north. Her middle son, Lucerys, flew to the Stormlands. Rhaenyra hoped that the war would begin and, if the gods were good, end with diplomacy. As always, they weren't.
Little Prince Lucerys must have wet himself when he entered Storm's End and found King Aegon's younger brother Aemond already with Lord Baratheon. Aemond was fearsome even before he lost his eye and set a sapphire in its stead. But the princeling pleaded his mother's case. Finally, Lord Baratheon made his decision. Go home, pup, and tell the bitch your mother that the Lord of Storm's End is not a dog she can whistle up. As Aemond's false eye gleamed at him, the princeling fled the castle and mounted his young dragon, Arrax. The rain fell in sheets, and great bolts of lightning lit the world bright as day. Arrax was struggling to stay aloft in the gale, when a roar shook the very foundations of Storm's End. Aemond rose through the clouds, and below him, the monstrous Vhagar. Vhagar was 5 times the size of Arrax, and the hardened survivor of 100 battles. Vhagar caught him above Shipbreaker Bay. Watchers on the castle walls saw distant blasts of flame, and heard a shriek drown out the thunder. Prince Lucerys fell, broken, to be swallowed by the waves. With his death, the War of Ravens came to an end, and the War of Fire and Blood began.
Dude, that's sick. That was...
When Rhaenyra heard of her son's death, she collapsed. She considered ending the war right then, until a raven arrived from her husband, Daemon. Her son would be avenged. Whispers slithered through the taverns and back alleys of Flea Bottom. 2 men were found. One was a former gold cloak, the other, a rat catcher in the Red Keep who knew all its secrets. History remembers them only as blood and cheese. One night, Queen Helena entered the royal apartments with her daughter and 2 sons to put them to bed. Without warning, Blood and Cheese burst in, daggers in hand. They told her that a debt was owed. A son for a son. Blood and Cheese demanded she choose which son would be ripped from her forever. Queen Helena pleaded with the men to kill her instead, but they refused. Weeping, Helena named her younger son, Maelor. Perhaps she thought the boy was too young to understand. Perhaps because the older boy was King Aegon's firstborn son and heir. You hear that, little boy? She's whispered to the younger son. Your mama wants you dead. Then blood struck off the older boy's head with a single blow. When the guards burst in, they found Queen Helena still screaming, clasping her dead son's body to her, mad with grief. The blood of their children transformed a dynastic dispute into a war of annihilation.
Genius.
The grief and rage of losing a child could burn down the world. Either Aegon or Rhaenyra could live at the end, but not both.
What happened to the little one, though? Did they stay there, or did they
Rhaenyra's
take
forces struck yet another blow. The moment the Lord of Harrenhal saw Daemon Targaryen circling the castle on his dragon Caraxes, he struck his banners and surrendered. The Blacks now had the strongest castle in the Riverlands. Darker news still came to Aegon. Thanks to Rhaenyra's sons, Winterfell had declared for Rhaenyra, as had the Vale. Furious, Aegon dismissed his grandfather, Sir Otto, as Hand, and appointed Sir Criston Cole, who swore to march on all the lords who had declared for Rhaenyra and put their castles to the torch. Cole and the royal army first marched north and laid siege to Rook's Rest, a black stronghold near Dragonstone. When their lord saw their approach, he sent a raven to Rhaenyra, begging for help. For days he watched his fields and villages burning, with no response from his queen, until one day, a shadow passed over the Green Army. Rhaenyra had sent not an army, but her former mother-by-law, Rhaenys, and her dragon, Meleys. As her ancestor had done at the Field of Fire, Rhaenys gleefully began to incinerate Sir Criston's army. But Aegon had set a trap, and Rhaenys had flown right into it. As Rhaenys and Meleys blanketed Sir Criston's troops in dragon flame, 2 other dragons rose into the sky.
Kidding me.
Aemond on Vhagar, and King Aegon himself on the gleaming Sunfire. To her credit, Rhaenys didn't flee. Dragon fought dragons, and his second son blossomed in the sky. When the smoke cleared, only Aemond and Vhagar stood uninjured. Sunfire, the most magnificent dragon in the world, had one of its wings almost completely torn from its body. Trapped beneath Sunfire was the king himself, broken and burned so badly in places that his armor had fused onto his flesh. His body survived, but his mind was given over to milk of the poppy. Meleys had been torn to shreds, and her rider, Rhaenys, was a pile of ash. Panicked by the defeat, Rhaenyra shipped her 2 youngest sons across the narrow sea for their protection, only for her youngest to return days later, clinging to the neck of his wounded and dying dragon. He and his brother had been set upon by an enemy fleet just off Dragonstone. Defying his mother's command, Rhaenyra's eldest son and heir, Jaehaerys, mounted his dragon Vermax and flew to rescue his other brother and punish the enemy fleet. But the foolish boy let Vermax be hooked like a trout and dragged into the sea, where he soaked up even more arrows than seawater. His brother disappeared over the horizon or beneath the waves. No one could say for sure. With the loss of 4 dragons, Rhaenyra's only advantage was fading. Luckily for her, over the centuries, House Targaryen had spilled more than blood on Dragonstone. She promised gold and title to any of the Targaryen bastards who could tame the 6 unclaimed dragons on the island. These bastards were called the Dragon Seeds, though most were called Supper. And perhaps the dragons were eventually sated, or bored, but 4 of them accepted riders and were enlisted in Rhaenyra's cause.
After Rook's Rest, Aemond One-Eye took command of the Greens from his crippled and poppy-addled brother. Aemond was the blood of the dragon, and dragons don't cower behind city walls. He marched the king's army north to take back Harrenhal from Rhaenyra's husband, Daemon. But when he and Criston Cole reached the castle, they found the gates open with Daemon and all his men gone. That night they feasted their victory. Daemon had fled rather than face their wrath. But Daemon was more snake than dragon. As Aemond marched north, he'd flown Caraxes south, slithering past the Green Army over the waters of the God's Eye. One day, King's Landing looked up and saw 2 dragons circling their foul city. Daemon and Rhaenyra had come for her throne, for the city was defenseless. Aemond had taken the king's army from the city, and worse, he'd taken his dragon, Vhagar. Seeing that resistance was hopeless, the small council surrendered the city, the Queen Mother Alicent, and the broken Queen Helena. But not King Aegon. Somehow, despite his wounds and delirium, he had vanished from the city. And so Queen Rhaenyra climbed the steps and seated herself on the Iron Throne. Legend has it that as she left the hall later, blood trickled down her legs and hands, proving the Iron Throne had spurned her. Nonsense. It's a chair made of steel blades. Rhaenyra had wanted it all her life and had sacrificed 2 sons for it. She likely gripped the damn thing too tight.
Dude, that action is
When
so
Aemond
fucking
realized
good.
that his arrogance had cost him the capital, he mounted
He's the best
Vhagar in
at
a
it, I
black
swear.
rage and rained fire onto every village and castle he suspected of disloyalty. Abandoned by Aemond, Sir Criston marched the royal army back to King's Landing, intent on recapturing the city himself. Instead, he was trapped and cut to pieces by the Riverlords, who had sworn to support Rhaenyra's claim. When a new army of Green Loyalists marched up from the Reach and laid siege to the city of Tumbleton, Rhaenyra sent 2 of her Dragon Seeds to lay waste to them. Instead, the Dragon Seeds proved their bastard nature and betrayed her. They burned the city, and all the black forces garrisoned within. Lucky for her, they didn't turn towards King's Landing, but hawed and drank in the ruins with the Greens, who were victorious and somewhat confused.
Rhaenyra now mistrusted all the Dragon Seeds, including the girl who rode with her husband Daemon, hunting Aemond in the Riverlands. She ordered the girl's head be sent to her, but there was a complication. As well as her dragon, the girl had taken to riding Daemon. When Daemon received the queen's order, he proclaimed it a queen's words and a whore's work. He sent the girl away at dawn, watching her and her dragon vanish into the morning mists. Then Daemon sent a challenge to his nephew Aemond and flew to Harrenhal, alone, to wait. 14 days later, a shadow blacker than any passing cloud swept over Harrenhal. Vhagar had come at last, and on her back rode one-eyed Prince Aemond. He mocked Daemon for facing him alone. "You have lived too long, uncle." And Daemon replied, "On that much, we agree." Then the old prince climbed stiffly onto the back of his dragon Caraxes, but neglected to fasten the chains that secured rider to saddle. The sun was close to setting when, as one, the two dragons leapt into the sky. Daemon took Caraxes up swiftly until they disappeared into a bank of clouds. Vhagar, older and slow, ascended more gradually. Up and up Vhagar soared, searching for Caraxes. Sudden as a thunderbolt, a shrieking Caraxes dove upon Vhagar. Locked together, the dragons tumbled toward the lake. Caraxes' jaws closed about Vhagar's neck, but Vhagar raked open Caraxes' belly, and her teeth ripped off a wing. The lake rushed up with terrible speed. Then Daemon Targaryen, who had never fastened his riding chains, stood in his saddle. He leapt from his dragon to Aemon's, and in his hand was Dark Sister, the Valyrian sword of Aegon's sister queen, Visenya. As Aemond One Eye looked up in terror, Daemon ripped off his nephew's helm and drove the sword down into his one remaining eye so hard the point came out the back of the young prince's throat. Half a heartbeat later, the dragons struck the lake, sending up a gout of water so high that it was said to have been as tall as Harrenhal's great tower. The lake boiled with dragon blood, and then was still. Daemon Targaryen was 49 at his death. Prince Aemond had only turned 20. Vhagar, the greatest of the Targaryen dragons, had counted 181 years. Thus passed the last living creature from the days of Aegon's conquest.
Back in King's Landing, Queen Rhaenyra didn't have much time to grieve for her stupid husband. The mad former queen, Helaena, flung herself from a balcony to be impaled upon the iron spikes lining the moat of Maegor's holdfast. That night, the city rose in riot against Rhaenyra, demanding justice for Queen Helaena and her murdered son, among other foolish peasant fantasies. In the midst of this chaos, a one-handed fool called the Shepherd began to rant against dragons. Not just the ones of the enemy, but all dragons everywhere. As he pointed to the dragon pit above on the hill, he shouted, "There the demons dwell. This is their city. If you would make it yours, first you must destroy them."
This is that slide.
The cry went up from 10,000 throats. "Kill them!" There were 4 dragons housed within the dragon pit that night. By the time the first of the attackers came pouring in, all 4 were roused, awake, and angry. Nobody knows how many men and women died that night. Who cares? They all should have. Trapped within the pit, the dragons could not fly. Instead, they fought with horns, claws, teeth, and fire. For every man who died, 10 more appeared, shouting that the dragons must die. One by one, they did. Finally, the last remaining dragon broke her chains, spread her wings, and flew straight up at the Great Dome, trying to flee. Already weakened by dragon flame, the dome cracked under the force of impact, and then tumbled down, crushing dragon slayers and herself.
High atop the Red Keep, Queen Rhaenyra clutched her 2 remaining sons to her as she watched the end of her family's might, too afraid of the peasants to defend her dragons. At least her older son, Joffrey, had a man's spine. He stole his mother's dragon, Syrax, and tried to fly it to the dragon pit to save his birthright. But the stupid beast didn't understand and twisted beneath him, fighting to be free of the little boy. Until it was. A queen is still a woman, with all the weakness of that sex. Weeping for her lost son more than her dragons, Rhaenyra abandoned the Iron Throne and sold her crown to buy passage for her and her lost son back to Dragonstone. Rhaenyra hoped to hatch more dragons from the eggs in the castle. But when she landed, the welcoming party slew her guards and marched her and her son at spear point to the castle. to face a dead man and a dying dragon. Sister! King Aegon, second of his name, called out to Rhaenyra. Rook's Rest had left Aegon bent and twisted, his once handsome face puffy from milk of the poppy, with burn scars covering half his body. Rhaenyra, ever defiant, told her dear brother that she'd hoped he was dead. After you, Aegon answered. Then Sunfire bathed her in a blast of flame and devoured her in 6 bites when her son watched, leaving the 7th and final bite her lower leg for the stranger.
Rhaenyra was dead, and King Aegon sat the Iron Throne again. But only for half a year. He was poisoned by his own men and replaced with the very boy who had watched his mother devoured.
When Rhaenyra's last son wed Aegon's only daughter, the Dance of Dragons officially ended. Ash and burned men, all that was left of the Riverlands. 2 scared children spouting oaths they didn't understand, all that was left of the mighty House Targaryen. Ancient skulls and hatchlings that grew no bigger than cats, all that was left of the dragons.
Wicked. Wicked.
Each brother of the Night's Watch swears a sacred oath to protect the realms of men. That doesn't mean pissing about, waiting for the cold to finally put an end to you. It means bleeding. It means fighting. It means going beyond the wall and hunting down those who mean harm to the realm. So how do you get 1,000 rapists and thieves to fight together, to bleed together? That's the burden of the Lord Commander. He keeps the builders building, the rangers ranging, and the stewards stewarding, or else it all falls apart. Each Lord Commander is chosen from and by his fellow brothers, and he serves for life. A long time ago, you may have had men from Queensgate and Long Barrow and the other 16 castles of the Wall come to Castle Black for an election. These days, you'd be lucky to scrape a few dozen from Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower, or however many they can spare who cast votes in their stead. All the same, the brothers are allowed to name whomever they think worthy of the title. Then we vote until one man receives a majority, however long it takes. Some elections have lasted less than an hour. Some have lasted weeks. One even lasted 2 years. Maester Aemon has said there have been 997 Lord Commanders since the Night's Watch was founded. Back then we had true soldiers, men of honor and strength. Now look who mans the wall. Bastards. Peasants who stole a sheep to bugger, and fat little nobles who weren't worthy of their Lord Father's land. But the Lord Commander must find a place for them all, and turn these walking piles of horse dung into soldiers of the Night's Watch. Though we haven't always been so lucky to have such men to lead us. We've had cowards and fools as well, our tyrants and our madmen. Runsel Hightower tried to bequeath the watch to his bastard. Roderick Flint thought to make himself king beyond the wall. Tristan Mudd, Mad Mark Rankenfell, Robin Hill, each nearly destroyed us with their foolishness. 600 years ago, the commanders at Snowgate and the Nightfort even went to war against each other. The simpering Lord Commander asked them politely to lay aside their quarrel, and incredibly they did. Because they joined forces to murder him. The Stark and Winterfell had to intervene and take both their heads to save the Night's Watch. Now we've got more mouths than we can feed. A southern king in our castle, and cells full of wildlings, and no Lord Commander, since the last was betrayed by his own men. We need a new leader. A man respected enough to hold the watch together in this dark hour. A leader strong enough to make sure that the Night's Watch survives the coming winter, no matter the cost.
It wasn't you, bro. It was not you. Bolton.
Brandon the Builder, founder of House Stark, raised Winterfell with giants over 8,000 years ago. Or so nursemaids tell all the children of the North. The children nod, wide-eyed, unaware of the lesson forced on them, that if even giants obeyed a Stark, so too should they. But like every other castle, Winterfell was built in pieces over thousands of years. The first men settled there because of the hot springs that bubbled through the ground. The water and the heat helped them survive the northern winters, and they built defenses to keep it for themselves. Nobody raised the castle all at once. Probably nobody meant to raise a castle at all. In those days, the Starks were not the greatest house in the north, and Winterfell was not the greatest castle. Barristan was the oldest, dating to the first king, and the Starks fought the Barrow kings for 1,000 years. Greywater Watch was, like the Crannog men themselves, the strangest. Only marriage subdued its marsh kings. But the greatest rival to Winterfell was always the Dreadfort, and my ancestors, the Red Kings of House Bolton. If tales can be believed, we fought from the long night until the Andals came. Because of us, Winterfell raised its first walls. When we took and burnt the castle anyway, Winterfell built more keeps, more walls, more guard towers. They expanded the granaries and larders to survive our sieges. They tended the godswood to win favor with the old gods against us. As the castle grew, more farmers and villagers flocked every winter from across the north to huddle under its walls, raising the winter town. In the spring, these villagers would find themselves marching in the Stark armies to fight against us. The greatness of Winterfell is as much our doing as the Starks. But in the end, neither its stone walls nor its tall keeps and iron gates could save Winterfell. At its height, it could have lasted a year under heavy siege. But a handful of Ironborn seized it in the night, while its lord, the king in the north, was playing in the south. My dagger ended his reign, and now House Bolton holds the castle of our ancient enemies. The direwolf no longer flies from the battlements above me, nor guards the doors and cornices of Winterfell against me. Below me, miles of long-dead Starks fade into darkness and obscurity, until even their faces are lost. Some Northerners whisper that they wait for the day their house will rise again. They will wait forever.
Didn't have to wait that long after all, boy. Robert's Rebellion.
Barristan the Bold, they call me to my face. I know what they say behind my back. Barristan the Old. And it's true. I am old, with hair as white as all the winters I've seen. The older a man grows, the less sleep he needs. These days, I barely sleep at all. When darkness falls over this strange city, I find myself visited by the faces of the kings I have served, the faces of those I swore to protect, the faces of those I failed. All I ever wanted was to live a life of honor, defending a king worthy of service. During the War of the Ninepenny Kings, I sought out Malus the Monstrous, last of the Blackfire pretenders who had started this whole war. Malus believed that his Targaryen blood gave him a claim to the Iron Throne. I made sure his blood claimed nothing more than the dirt around his corpse. To show his gratitude, the king elevated me to his king's guard. It was the proudest moment of my life.
No one gonna refer to little head on
But
the side
that
of
king
his head.
died, and I wasn't with him. Not that I could have saved him if I had been, but still, I vowed to do better with his son, the young Prince Aerys. For 20 years, his reign was peaceful and prosperous. Aerys was well loved by his subjects and respected by his lords. But as years went on, Aerys' temper soured. He became obsessed with dragons and fire, and the swords of the King's Guard couldn't defend him from the enemies he saw lurking in every shadow. My king went mad. But there was hope. His son and heir. Prince Rhaegar was everything a kingdom could hope for in a ruler. He was strong but gentle, wise and cautious, and a good friend. No matter the wounds Aerys dug into the realm, we had faith that his son would sew it back together again when he ascended the throne. Then came Lord Went's tourney at Harrenhal, the largest ever in Westeros. I unhorsed every man against me until only Prince Rhaegar remained. We each set our feet in our saddles and lowered our lances and charged. And I fell. Muddy and bruised, I then watched Rhaegar present Lyanna Stark with the victor's crown of roses, though she was betrothed to Robert Baratheon. And Rhaegar himself was married to Elia Martell. We all know what happened after. If I'd been a bit quicker with my lance, if I'd chosen a faster horse, perhaps I could have spared the kingdom from the destruction that came after. Or if I'd thought to warn Brandon Stark against his rashness. He came to King's Landing himself, demanding Rhaegar return his sister. Poor fool. If he'd only known the depth of Aerys' madness, he wouldn't have dared provoke him. Aerys ordered Brandon imprisoned, and I could do nothing but obey. When Brandon's father, Lord Rickard Stark, came to King's Landing to beg for his son, Aerys burned him alive, and I could do nothing but watch. I had sworn a vow to a mad king, and was honor-bound to obey him, even at the cost of my soul. Ravens soon arrived with dark news for the king. The Vale was in open revolt. Demanding Lyanna Stark's return, Robert Baratheon was smashing any army that dared face him. Eddard Stark, Brandon's younger brother, was marching the whole of the north down the neck and had taken Catelyn Tully, Brandon's betrothed, for his own, thus winning the support of the Riverlands. The king sent ravens to Casterly Rock to beg his former hand, Tywin Lannister, for help. And no ravens returned. A plan was devised. Prince Rhaegar would personally lead the royal forces, now reinforced with 10,000 Dornishmen, north to face Robert. Of the King's Guard, Lewin Martell and I would ride with the prince. Before we left, the prince confided in me that when he returned from this battle, there would be a great many changes in court. Despite my vows to the king, I confess I was excited. On the march to face Robert's army, we were sure we'd win. We had superior numbers, and we had Prince Rhaegar. His presence lifted the spirits of our men, and he looked every inch the king he was destined to become. But at the Trident, the gods played a cruel joke. Robert proved the Baratheon words as his army smashed through our lines. Lewin Martell was killed. I fell in combat, badly wounded, and could do nothing but watch as Robert's warhammer ended Rhaegar's glorious reign before it began, and the kingdom that would never be washed away down the Trident with his life's blood. But Robert spared me, insisting his personal maester tend to my wounds, out of respect. But respect for what? A king's guard shouldn't survive one king, let alone two, and one who should have been. I swore an oath to House Targaryen, and I failed them. All that's left of their fire is a single ember halfway across the world, surrounded by darkness. If the gods were good, I would still be young in the fullness of strength, but whatever the cost, I will not let this ember go out. This time, I will not fail.
Wow. You know, I said the last one was my favorite. Scrap that. This one. Even if it just stopped after the first 20 minutes with the Targaryen story. The Dance of the Dragons. Whoa. Whoa. I must have not gotten to that point in the book. Yeah, I didn't. I must have... Yeah, I'd stopped at that part, didn't I? Before the Dance of Dragons. So I didn't get to read all this bit. But I'm happy I got to watch it like this. It was, I don't know, it's just way more dramatic. Oh, dude, I want to see that. You know, dare I say it, the stories of the old stories of the sort of Westeros and the whole Game of Thrones world may be more intriguing than the current ones. That shit is just like, yo, with the kids. They didn't actually say what they did. I guess like they left the kids staying there, but just imagine all of that shit was. Oh, I don't even know, man. I'm speechless. Fucking love that shit. That shit was wicked. Wicked. What was your favorite bit? Which is the era or family that gets you most excited, that you'd love? Whose history you'd love to see brought to life that hasn't been so far? Or maybe in a possible hypothetical prequel series that may or may not happen down the road. Let me know. That Targaryen one was sick. I actually reckon if they do go back once Game of Thrones after this next 2 seasons are done, I'd rather if they followed one family, kind of like how they done with the Starks. So they're arguably, even though they do kind of balance it out with quite a lot of people, the Starks are kind of still the primary focus. You can kind of argue who would be the focus of the next show. I reckon the Targaryens should be like the focus of a new series, and I reckon they should go right back to the full-on Valyria history. I love it. Let me know, guys. Write comments down below. You like the video, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up. I am Ed Reese, and this has been my first take to Game of Thrones History Unlocked Part 9. I love it. Later, guys.